system unfolding. Military science fiction podcast. Untold stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction podcast. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and rants. Military science fiction podcast.
Welcome to the Military Science Fiction Podcast. I'm your host, along with Rick Partlow and Josh Hayes. I'm Jeffery H. Haskell, author of Grimm's War. Rick is the author of like a bazillion books, but most famously Drop Trooper.
Metric bazillion.
A metric bazillion is a scientific number. Josh is the author of a couple of books, and he's working on one that I'm really excited to read, Josh.
As am I.
I'm excited to read it too.
I'm just excited to have it done. That's all I'm excited about.
And this week we've got the awesome Blaine Pardoe with us, who is author of also a metric ton of books, including a bunch of Battletech books, and most recently his own series.
Land and
Pull it
Sea.
up here. All right, Blaine, tell us about yourself a little bit.
Well, I started out of college writing for FASA Corporation. I wrote Battletech for 36 years before I got canceled. I've been over at Wargate ever since. We've been doing the Land and Sea series, which is a mecha-based series, which is a lot of fun. It's mecha versus aliens. And I've also done Tenure. With the Tenure series is kind of the Punisher going after the woke. A little therapeutic for me. And then there's the Blue Dawn series, which is a political thriller series about a Second American Civil War. So those are the primary series that I do, but I'm taking a page from Rick. I just finished the first book of a series within a series for Land and Sea. So
Cool.
It's a
having a lot of fun.
It's a Russian nesting series.
Yes.
Well, this week, because we have Blaine with us, and he is one of the Grand Masters of mechs, because if you work for FASA, then you're there with Battletech when it started, and that's what created the whole mech thing here in America anyways. So we're going to talk about mechs and the future of militarized combat with mechanized robot-like creatures and power suits and the whole bit, whatever floats your boat.
We've all, Jeff, have you written mechs in your books?
The Marines in Grimm's War have Raptor suits, which
Yeah.
are loosely inspired by the Robotech suits from the third series. The bikes that would turn into the suits.
Right.
And I didn't want to get too heavily into mechs because I tend to slide toward more the hard science fiction.
Yeah.
And as much as cool as mechs are, you wouldn't want a standing thing to take a 120 millimeter round, in the chest.
Well, that kind of
that's a bad
depends on
time.
what your technology is like.
I was
What?
going to say, because I think we've all done a version of mechs at some point in the right. Like I did them in Tranquility, although I didn't call them mechs. I call them rigs, and they weren't, in the first book at least, they weren't technically battle mechs, but they were jury rigged to be so. And that was fun. And Blaine, I know that you have a long history with Battletech and that type of mech. I remember playing back in the day the video game, and then I had fun with it. But when Titanfall came out, I had a blast with Titanfall, and that the difference between the slow moving, bulky, like really heavy mechs to running around and jumping and all of that in Titan, that was me. I was in it. And so when I wrote Tranquility, those were the mechs that the type of mech that I envisioned was those really fast, agile, could be semi-autonomous mechs. So I'm curious, with all the history of your mech writing, what is your favorite type of battle mech to create or to utilize in your books?
Well, I actually enjoy the series I'm working on now, which is Land and Sea, because we based a lot of that off DARPA papers and their analysis about this, as opposed to Battletech. Battletech is so grossly unrealistic, and I can say that now because I don't write for them. But 3 stories, 120 kilometers per hour, enough firepower to level a city block.
Unguided LRM-20s, Blaine. The
Yeah, yeah.
bane of my existence.
Well, and machine guns, it only had a range of 150 meters. And there's a lot of flaws within Battletech. And they dealt with a lot of the real problems that we face with power armor or mecha with a lot of what I call hand wavium. They just said, oh, well, we got fusion reactors and that allows this. But the biggest challenge that any of us has when we do this is you really have to explain how the tech works. You can't just throw somebody in a rig or in a mech and go, well, people are just going to assume it works because the power required to do a lot of what a mech is required to do, including walking, running, etc., just is it's incredible. So you really have to me, at least when we started doing the Land and Sea series, is I really had to first tackle how does power work and how did I deal with the power consumption end of it, just so that these things were realistic, because otherwise people just tear them apart as it is. It, I think it's a big dream we all have because we all watched Robotech as kids. We all enjoyed that stuff, with the exception of Minmay singing. But
No.
let's be honest, we enjoyed that stuff. We want to see those
I didn't
things.
enjoy the soap opera parts of it, but
Yeah, you could trim all that stuff out and just give me the battle sequences. I'm into that. But
yeah.
we all want that stuff to work, but to make it work, there's a lot of effort you have to do. I think there's a role that mecha play in combat. They definitely are an asset if they're the smaller rigs, kind of like what you mentioned in Titanfall, Josh, and what we're designing, the smaller rigs. They're great in an urban environment because you can send them down alleyways and put them on
Yeah.
rooftops. You can't be doing that crap with a tank. And you're
Right.
definitely,
Right.
I always cracked up in Battletech because they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to jump jet my mech 100-tonner and land him on the roof of a building and then he's going to fire down. I'm like, first of all, he lifting 100 tons, good luck. And if you do land on a roof, you're just going to the basement.
Right.
There's a lot of like I said, it's a lot of hand wavium out there.
Well, I'm
It was
curious
a,
then.
Battletech was a creation of its time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if any of the guys in FASA had any military experience,
Well,
but
Blaine,
it was
I would think if you can build 100-ton mech that can jump that high, you can probably build a building that can hold it.
Yeah, but why would you?
Right.
I know.
Well, I'm curious about the power aspect that you're talking about. I'm looking, and forgive me, I haven't read Land and Sea, but I'm looking at the books here, and it looks like you've got some really big, monstrous mechs like we're talking about, but then also in Cyclone of Chaos or Cyclones of Chaos, you've got a character in the mech that's not as big. I mean, it's almost like power armor. So how do you parse the two when it comes to like power and uh battle readiness and that kind of thing?
Well, we started with the first generation of rigs that we had were the power armor suits, more like
Hmm.
the Talos suit concept.
Yeah.
We had to do a little bit of hand waving and say, look, battery issues 25 years from now are significantly better. But even with the original suits that were the power armor suits, they had a field time of 3 to 4 hours before they had to do a hot swap or a recharge. And when you get to the larger mechs that we have, the Generation 2s and Generation 3 Asher suits, those they're using some of the captured alien technology for power generation.
I
So
love that.
there's ways you have to get around it, but if you don't explain it, I will tell you the fans will tear you up because mechs exist in my mind somewhere between hard science fiction and fantasy science fiction. They're in that little niche.
I
And
heard I heard a good explanation of mechs from I forget which author it was, but it was in a book about like military science. It was military science fiction, but it was like the fact-based part of it. Like it was articles about future weapon systems, and they were saying that mechs logistically make little sense because of the back and forth that we're going through now with tanks and anti-tank weaponry. We can see that you know, anti-tank weapons have the capability of destroying a multi-million-dollar tank with a few $1,000 weapon, but then the tanks get a different armor, you get a different system, and things swing back and forth. And they said that'll happen, you know, throughout the centuries. But the problem with battle mechs, it's not as Jeff was saying that they're big and big targets. The problem is if when you get to the point where the enemy's anti-armor weapons take out your mech, it costs so much more than a tank.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the big challenges we have is we've had fans reaching out going, well, how come everybody doesn't just get a mech? And I'm like, the cost of doing that, and just even the cost of training
Yeah.
everybody in that is phenomenal. And you want to be able to tap kind of that real world vibe with mechs, but at the same time, you got to go, look, there's a reason that, not everybody's driving a tank in the United States Cavalry right now. It's just not practical.
And not everybody flies an F-22 in the Air Force. When I joined the Army, I learned there's so many schools I'd never even heard of, in the movies, because movies are always like Rangers and Airborne and, maybe Air Assault. But, there's, Pathfinder School, which is something I always wanted to do, which is they teach you how to find trails and stuff in the jungle and lead the way and all this other crazy stuff. So I always treat, like with my Marines and Against All Odds, I treat the Raptors as a school. It's a school that a select few Marines get to go to when they're really good at what they do. And it's Raptor School. And it's a 4-week intensive school. And I kind of feel like that's how mechs would be in the military. It would be, unless you're talking about like a ragtag, group of freedom fighters kind of thing. But if it's actual military, it would be a school. And very few people will get to go to it.
Well, yeah, not only that, I think you're also dealing with the maintenance side is amazing because I went to Rangers Best Ranger competition 2 years ago, and I got to spend some time with the tankers there, and I was talking about the amount of maintenance required on an M1 Abrams for every 10 hours that it's out in the field. It's like it's back in the shed getting 12 hours of maintenance for it's just ridiculous.
Well, Blaine, when I went in the infantry, I had the choice. Not I could put down like my top choices of where I wanted to go, and that is the reason that all of my top 3 choices were light infantry because I didn't want to have to be involved with maintaining APCs.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. And mechs, if you think about just the way they move, how they move, depending on how you deal with it in your universe, whether you're using hydraulics or Myanmar or whatever, doesn't matter. The amount of maintenance that would be required on those things is amazingly high. And the techs, because you got to kind of carry not only a tech, but an entire trailer of spare parts and tools. And I've been going through some stuff recently where I'm doing kind of a tech readout book for our universe. And I've had to spec out like, okay, they use standardized tools. They didn't come up with unique tools. True story. I bought an Air Force ejection seat. It's in my office.
I love that.
Well, the thing was, I got it and I had to remove the rail. It was from a B-52 downward firing ejection seat, the EW seat. So I had to remove the rail and some hoses. A freaking thing, not a single bolt in metric or English worked on any of that stuff. And I contacted the manufacturer and they're like, oh yeah, everything is a specialized tool. You gotta have a specialized.
Then you get to pay. Then you get the government to buy the tools.
100%.
Yeah,
and it's $1,000 wrench.
Yeah, that's
so
like
I made a point. I made a point in my thing going, look, one of the design specifications for our Oshers is they used all standard tools. They were
like
already
when the military wanted to do the rifle competition, all the rifle companies were like, yeah, but if we made special ammo, they'd have to buy the ammo from us and only us. And so they all came with crazy ammo, caseless and double stacked ammo and all this other stuff. So those weapons developers are just salivating at the thought of like, okay, if we use our own tools that nobody else has, they'll have to buy them from us to repair everything.
Well, depending on how you arm your mechs too, you're talking about carrying around a lot of ammunition potentially, which is just makes you a giant bomb, in a standard straight up fight in many respects. So, and the ranges we're dealing with, you know, I think everybody's got this view of Mecca that they're clashing with each other head to head. That doesn't, and that's great stuff. I love writing it, but realistically, your whole goal is to kill them at a distance. I mean, as far away as
Well,
possible.
realistically, but you're also trying to get people entertained. So that's why,
Yes.
like, I did that wholesale slaughter series, and when I started it, I kind of have the same idea you do. I'm not hard science fiction, but I want everything to make sense. So I'm like, well, there is a very narrow corridor I can go into to make this make sense logically and yet also be theatrically kind of like Battletech.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so I made it after the fall of a advanced civilization, and they're only like scrambling back to what it used to be. So they don't have the tools to make new weapons. Like they can't design new weapons. All they have is the stuff left over to make the weapons that were being used when the empire fell, and that happened to be mechs because in any there may be a time, a narrow window of military technology where mechs make sense, and it's not going to last long. But my thought was, well, what if you're at that time, everything falls apart, and all they have left are the mechs, and they can't make the anti-armor weapons that would make them obsolete.
Oh yeah. Well, what I did was put them up my Asher rigs we put up against aliens who engage in close quarter combat. And that's how I get my theatric scenes is the aliens don't feel pain and they don't have fear. So they rush up
So they're Marines.
They
yeah,
don't feel pain. They don't feel hunger.
yeah.
Will not stop.
They just want to tear these things apart. And that's how I get my close up action. But if I'm doing something out of the Russia-Bravo war where they're fighting the Russian rigs, it's all long range shit, man. You don't want to get close to these
Yeah.
guys.
I'm a bit of a air combat geek, and the beyond visual range thing is always like really cool. And that's kind of how I feel like mechs would be like that, but on the ground. You'd have spotters, way up, and the mechs would be basically like walking artillery guns, firing guided missiles, laser guided missiles or whatever against enemy targets, well, way far away than they could see.
Yeah, that's what I did with in the drop trooper universe. The only mechs they had were, well, the enemy had them actually, and they weren't walking tanks. They were walking artillery pieces that were behind the lines, and they just were more adaptable for like versatile for different terrains.
I mean,
You know,
it's how I handle space combat is it's all BVR in space combat. So there's
Yeah.
no fighters or dogfighting or anything like that. As much as I like that stuff.
it's
Um,
funny when you mentioned that the mechs could only shoot 150 meters or whatever in BattleTech. It's like that's not even the maximum range of a person firing a rifle.
Right.
Like that's so close. But also like talking about shooting beyond visual range, like you would think if you made a mech that weighs a couple hundred metric tons that can level buildings and fire big, huge rounds that will obliterate anything, that maybe they'd have some kind of like aerial drone system that would be pinpointing targets, like and like what you're saying,
Well,
dude,
that's
like
kind of, but that's ignoring the possibility of really advanced electronic countermeasures that could take out that
it's
kind of.
100% that's true, but it would still be a thing, right? You
well,
would have
to
countermeasures
defend
for it.
BattleTech, because I know Blaine doesn't want to be in the position of defending BattleTech, but
No,
I grew up
never.
with this stuff. Rick was talking about how there was a fall. That's what happened with BattleTech. They didn't have new technology. And there was this one company, this one organization that hoarded all the technology. And the
Constant.
houses, when they were fighting each other, they were always scrambling for parts and trying to repair what they had because all their technology sucked. They couldn't make any new technology. They weren't allowed to manufacture new mechs. And that's why when the clans came in and invaded, it was such a big deal because they had all new stuff and they knew how to make it. But the houses, like the Federated Sons and the Draconis combined, which were the two big houses, they had no idea how to make anything. They didn't have the technology to do that. I forget the name of the guys who controlled it all in the center of the universe.
Comstar.
Comstar. Yeah, Comstar controlled all of it.
You know what's funny is you talk about the fixing it, and Blaine, you mentioned having like universal tools and that kind of thing. And this is something I should have thought about, and now I'm just thinking about it. Is no one talks about cleaning them, right? Like when you go out into battle with your rifle and you use it, you're going to spend hours cleaning that rifle before you go back out. But you're talking about like these huge guns, like even the mechanisms, the gears, the pistons, the gyros, like all of that stuff that's inside the mech. Like if you're out on a battlefield and there's dirt flying and explosions and dust and all of that stuff, you're going to have a hell of a time cleaning that thing before every battle, and you're basically gonna have to take it apart and clean it and put it back together. That would
Well,
suck.
that's what the techs are for. Pilots don't do that stuff.
No, I get it, but I didn't think to address that in my books, and I it's interesting when you think of, like we've talked about battlefield logistics and all that kind of stuff before, but when you talk about the stuff that could potentially hamper an attack, is just dirt. Like the weapon being dirty. You don't have to mess with that. Space fighters and spaceships and stuff. There's no dirt. But on a planet, you'd have to definitely deal with that.
Oh yeah,
the trucks you drove in the Army, you spent hours, like 2 or 3 hours, with maintenance both before and after you used it, no matter how much time you used it on.
Right.
So only imagine a big mech, how long that would take.
It's incredible because, and those are some of the better stories, I think, from a writer's perspective, when you do include the techs, because the techs have a very different view of the battle than the guys in the suits.
Yeah.
Their whole thing is, hey, don't ding that thing up. I got to fix it. And, it's makes for some better storytelling to be able to include them, because you get into the dynamic relationship, between the pilot and the tech, which I think is fun to play with, but personally. But I think the other thing, I think Rick raised a really great point, and I want to highlight it, which is for every technology, there's a counter technology. We've seen this in Ukraine. So drones are big, and now what's happening is anti-drone technology has taken a huge leap forward and is now taking down a lot of drones, which is forcing the people who are making the drones to change how they're making the drones so that they're not operating in
using
ways.
fiber optics now.
Yeah, I've seen those fiber optic lines out, stringing out from trenches and stuff where they've been doing that, and it's a dynamic thing that is constantly happening, and that will happen with mechs as well. It's got to. And the counter can't always be, well, we're just going to build our own mechs, and that solves the problem. A lot of times it's a more sophisticated approach, but for every approach, there's a counter to it. And that opens that narrow window that Rick was talking about, where you can say, well, there is a space here where this stuff works.
It would almost have to be like we've created a new kind of armor that is immune to modern firearms, and then that's when a mech would work.
Or I was going to mention before, some kind of electromagnetic field that you can, create with whatever powers your mech that can deflect anything metal, or get rid of missiles coming your way.
Because it's funny with drones, like the countermeasures to drones was stuff we already had, and it was just making it put more in widely use. And so I feel like the countermeasure armor has always been, since World War II, the countermeasure armor has always been man-portable, either other armor or man-portable anti-armor devices. Like, well, not that the bazooka was very good at anti-armor, but the bazooka and its descendants, like the dragon and stuff like that, TOW. And I feel like with mechs, you have to almost have like some sort of indestructible armor in order to make it make sense in like a hard sci-fi perspective, where, or like Rick said, some sort of force field where the bullets or the weapons simply could not hit them, and you were forced to use energy weapons or some form of alternate weapon other than just, hey, let's shoot a shell at it going 2,000 meters per second.
Well, you run into this thing of the more armor you put, the more power you're going to need to move it, and the slower it's going to be, which then reduces the effectiveness of the mecha, whatever universe you're in. It's this dance between, armor and weight and propulsion. And it's a fascinating, I
It's going to
mean,
have to be a universe that uses mechs for their main weapons against each other, not like against the aliens because that's specialized. You're going to have some kind of almost magical to us power source, some kind of fusion reactor that'll fit inside of a mech, something that puts out like a city's what's now a city's worth of power in something 30 feet tall.
Well, you wouldn't have to
yeah,
have a an enormous power supply like that, especially if it was you've got the watches that are charged with kinetic movement and that kind of thing. You could put some type of system in the mech suit to have the kinetics of the movement continually
Yeah, but
charged.
then I mean, when you're talking about a military system, military likes to have like redundancies, and if you're in a position where say your mech is in a defensive position and can't move for days,
Sure.
and that you don't have any power.
oh
So
yeah.
we talked a lot about like mechs and their role and what you would need to make them work, but let's talk a little bit about like what would you need to transport them? Because obviously we're talking about sci-fi, we're talking about
Drop
worlds. Um, how would you get them out of the gravity well? How would you make that work so that it wasn't like enormously expensive to move, basically an Abrams tank into orbit to take
I mean,
it
if you've got the technology to power these things, you're going to have the technology to make spaceships with fusion drives or plasma drives or whatever they can lift them. I mean,
on Earth. But I mean, like if you're like invading another planet or just for giggles, you got to get them back from that planet.
yeah.
I
And
used a system in Tranquility that was kind of like at the Edge of Tomorrow shuttles where the guys in the suits were hooked into the inside and they dropped out of
Oh
the
yeah.
bottom.
drop or
Um,
die, Cage.
right. And I can't remember exactly how exactly I did it, but those the cargo transport helicopters where the cab is in the front and then it's kind of an open body so they can set
Yeah.
down on the I
Oh, the
did that.
dragonflies.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did that with the dropship model where the basically the center portion of the dropship that's where the rigs would hook into. And it was not like totally open, it was partially enclosed, but the sides would fold up and then they would just eject straight down out of the ship. And then when they picked them up, the ship would just kind of, the rigs have to form up in a pickup formation, kind of like I don't know who does the rope extract, like the SEALs, special forces when they got to line up with the rope and the helicopter pulls them up. Kind of the same idea, basically.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I had drop ships that like yours, they would eject the mechs out the bottom. And the mechs, some of the mechs were light enough to have jump jets, and the bigger ones that did not have jump jets had basically one-time use harnesses, with rockets built into them that would land them safely, and then they would shrug that off and have to. And if you wanted them back, you're gonna have to land your drop ship and have them walk onto it.
Nice.
The problem I've always run into with dropships are what a beautiful target. Because if I take that out, I take out all the mechs that are
Well,
aboard it.
that's why you have your assault
100%.
shuttles escorting a drop ship.
Oh yeah. Well, but unfortunately, I'm not having to deal with that right now. We haven't gone into space yet in my
Oh,
universe, so I'm not dealing with it. But with BattleTech, the early years, they were talks of parachuting Mecha in. They
That'd be
came
a
in and
big freaking parachute.
yeah, they came in pods and dropped, and I was like, I think you guys are ignoring some of the laws of physics here because
how do you
to
deploy
explain.
It
your
kind of changed the
rigs
laws of physics.
in the books that you're working on now? How do you deploy them then if you're not
Well, they're already on the ground. They're fighting an invasion on Earth, so I don't have to go anywhere.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
It's
okay.
just a lot easier because I think, you run into some real challenges when you do this because and how it's always been portrayed in Battletech is, oh, we're going to go land our dropship. And I'm like, you do realize I would throw everything.
Massive dropships too. I mean, they were massive.
Yeah. 36 mechs on
Yeah. They were like 300-400 meters tall.
yeah.
I mean, like they look like cruise ships, basically the size of cruise ships, but they're egg shaped and they'd land. And yeah, I mean, it would be, yeah, you're going to be shooting that thing with every single weapon available the moment it hits atmosphere.
Yeah.
So I think, did they get around that by having like, there was like a rule about targeting enemy dropships?
No, that was only jump ships. That was only the jump ships. Those were like owned by Comstar or something, weren't they?
No, they had kind of a standard rule that you didn't blow those up because they couldn't, for a long time in Battletech, you couldn't build them. And then when the Fourth Secession War happened, they threw all that out the window. Suddenly, units that were companies before became entire regiments of mechs, which the concept of a regiment of battle mechs just still blows my mind in terms of the amount of damage they would do to a modern city just running through. I picture every burst gas line, water main, sewage line. I mean, you just can't build a city to deal with that kind of stress.
And I don't think, the logistically having thousands of mechs, on a planet that are that big, requiring that much maintenance, that much ordnance to just to keep going on a daily basis. If you think about like when we were in the Army, we carried 210 rounds, Rick?
Yeah, that was normal loadout.
Yeah, and so you burn through that in about 45 seconds, and you get a mech pilot with an autocannon 20 on there, just holding the trigger down, peppering a city. He's out of ammo. Somebody's got to come and reload him. And, the logistics is it's boring ish, but it's also it's one of our more popular episodes. People are always asking for a sequel to. But two, it's fun to think about like from a science fiction perspective, because a lot of the stuff that people say, like, well, why don't they have this in Grimm's War, or why don't they have that in Grimm's War? I'm like, well, it's like they're in the Navy and they're in a ship, but instead of being 900 miles away where another ship can come and resupply them, they're 90 light years away and nobody can come and resupply them. So what they have with them is what they get to use. And when they're out, including food. So it's logistics. Armies move on their stomachs, right? And so you can write about these enormous battles with regiments of mechs, but I mean, like you're going to have a dropship just as big, filled with nothing but the AC-20 ammo to reload all those things, or the missiles or rockets or whatever you're using. And so you got to think about that kind of stuff when you're designing your mechs. Like, okay, this is great, this is cool. I think Rick's solution was really elegant with his vigilante suits.
Yeah,
well, those are battle suits, not mechs.
They're mechish.
Once you get into the realm of battle suit, I think you're into mecha, Rick.
But now it's a lot easier to power a 9-foot tall suit of armor, and a lot easier to hide it. I mean, a 9-foot tall suit of armor, you can still go around in a city and not be seen. You got a 30-foot tall mech, you ain't hiding that.
No.
You'd be surprised. I've played
that. No. We used to joke about this all the time because people are like, well, what camouflage do you put on a mech? I'm like, it's 3 stories tall. It's running at 120 kilometers per hour. You can paint it hot pink. I don't care. Because it's not like it can stop and put its arms up and go, I'm a tree.
Yes and no, but like if you took like one of them, like a Mad Cat, and you painted it forest, BDU, green, and it went hull down, in the forest, you're not going to easily see it. So camouflage, is.
Of course, you'd be able to see it on thermal because those things would stand out like a candle.
Yeah, you know, some kind of baffling. But like with my Raptor suits, they have adaptive camouflage. They can't turn invisible, but they can pretty much turn invisible if they're not moving. And they have bafflers and they have sound dampeners and everything you need to be silent, and to be as stealthy as possible as you can in a 9 foot tall battle suit. But I think the principles of camouflage, and one of the things they talk about in Grimm's War is that they have to, when they're fighting in the raptor suits, they have to fight like they're not wearing the raptor suit. There's no special thing that you do in a raptor suit, the way you move or the way you communicate or the way you fight, because the second you start training somebody to fight a different way inside the suit, that becomes the way they fight outside the suit. And so you wouldn't, if you were people who went back and forth like my guys do between being regular grunts and wearing these suits, you wouldn't want to confuse the muscle memory and have them be like, okay, well now we're just not going to bother hiding. We're just going to walk out into combat and whatever, because you're in your suit now. So I think camouflage and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have situations where you have these huge mechs or vehicles, and it doesn't really matter what color they're painted. But I think you'd still want to. The principles of combat would still be the same. Or I could be
I'll tell
wrong.
you, one of the things I've struggled with over the years too is how do you make it work right? And one of the things my partner Brent Evans and I, when we were working on Land and Sea, is we actually started with the orthographic artwork for our rigs so that we knew where the human was positioned in the rig, which really determined where the control interfaces were, where weapons could go, where ammo could go, things along those lines. And we've been doing that with every rig that we designed. We do the artwork first to make sure it's going to work, then we work through the game specifications on it, which is very different for me because I'm a writer. I'm used to like, hey, I'll just make it up and it'll be okay. But it
Right?
actually adds that sense of realism to have that artwork there to go, okay, this is actually how this is going to function.
I had to do that with the Interceptor. I'm looking forward to see if I have it. I have like a really crude drawing of like, okay, well, here's where the ammo storage is, and here's where the galley is, and here's where they keep the extra food, because all of that became really important when you're talking about a ship that's deployed on its own for months at a time. And so I think it's really cool that you did that with your mechs. That would, to me, would be as a writer, that'd be the funnest part of the world building. Would be like, let's design a mech and every
Yeah.
cool thing about it. What's your favorite one that you've made?
Um, I'm very partial to the Rhino, and I really like the Wolverine because the Wolverine looks a lot like BattleTech Warhammer.
I love the
It's
Warhammer.
got two rail guns instead of hands. It's a long distance fighter. I like that. It's got some appeal to me. We haven't shown the artwork for that yet, but it looks good. And I like that one. And I like the Rhino simply because some of my favorite characters pilot it, and it's kind of fun. When I see it, I'm like, yeah, I know who's in that cockpit. That was the other thing we ended up doing. I'm curious, Rick, how you've dealt with this, or anybody else, honestly, is I talked to a friend of mine who's a helicopter pilot for the Army, and I was like, can you hop into any helicopter and fly it? And he was like, no. I can get it off the ground. He said, certainly the principles of aerodynamics are the same, but he said, you really can't just hop in a helicopter and go. And in BattleTech, it's hey, it doesn't matter what you're piloting, you can hop in the cockpit and drive it type thing. And we made the conscious decision to say, look, you're certified on a certain model of Osher suit. That isn't the same. They're not the same because the one thing I can never rule out is the Army being stupid that way.
Huh. Well, I kind of separated it according to the size of the mechs. So pretty much if you were piloting a mech that's one of the say 30-foot tall, I think I called them assault mechs, which is not like the BattleTech assault mech, which I think is their biggest one. In mine, they had the scout mechs, the assault mechs, and the strike mechs. And the strike mechs were the heavy ones that didn't have jets and were basically big lumbering gunboats. Um, the assault mechs had they were like the biggest one that had jets. So if you were a pilot of assault mechs, you could pretty much jump from like what I called the Golem, which is the most common one, to a Vindicator, to, you know, whatever other assault mech, as long as it's like the same what do you call era, same what's the word I'm looking
Tech
for?
level.
Well, no, yeah, this it's not like an old one, you know, that you have, you know, you haven't trained on that era of technology. But if it's a modern one, you can. But if you're going from an assault like to a strike mech, then you need retraining because it moves totally different. The purpose is different. You know, you can't move as quickly. You have to be careful where you step, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it'd be like you or I jumping if we could drive a car just fine. Put us in a Model T
Or
and go
I
down
mean,
the start.
even if it's the same era, put me in a 18 wheeler and I wouldn't be able to drive it very well.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, semi trucks are bizarre. I kind of do the same thing with Grims of War. It's yeah, pilots are pilots; they can fly anything, but flying is the easiest part of operating an aircraft. They pretty much are designed to stay up there, and you know, if there's a stick in the throttle, you're good to go. It's the landing and the taking off that are the problem. And so, someone who can fly a dropship can't necessarily fly a spaceship, or you know, or pilot one of the mech suits, or drive a
Yeah.
mudcat. You know,
Oh
it's
yeah, there's a huge difference in all of my series
yeah.
between people who pilot like what you're saying shuttles and people who are flying, you know, being the helm officer on a starship or in a suit. They're all totally different.
I watched a lot of World War II movies growing up, as I think we probably all did. And I remember the Shermans had the sticks, you know.
Yeah.
And so I was really surprised the first time I got a peek inside an Abrams and they had a steering wheel. And I'm like, wait, what? Why does it have a steering
No,
wheel?
no, it's motorcycle, man.
You know. So
There was a video game back in the day. I forget what it was called, but it was a tank video game, and it had those two sticks. I loved that game.
Battle Zone.
Battle Zone. There you go.
Battlezone, yep. Yeah. And so it's like, or even looking like having been in a Black Hawk and seen the inside of an Apache. You know, yeah, there's a you know what's called convection, not convection.
Collective. There's a collective,
Collective, and there's a
Collective
control
and-
stick. But beyond
The
that,
one
I mean,
called-
like you know,
Yeah.
you're just a monkey hitting buttons on the console trying to figure out how to make it go.
Yeah, I think people misunderstand how complicated those machines are. I do have to tell a true
cyclic.
story.
There's a cyclic and a collective. That was it.
Yeah, yeah.
I do have to tell a true story though, because I did get to go sit in an Abrams when I went to Best Ranger competition, because I was with the media. So I was like, hey, can I climb in there? And they're like, sure. They dropped me in there, you know, and it was great because I was like, oh, I now can describe this when I write about tanks. I can be accurate. And I'm like, okay, how do I get out? And the guy's like, okay, well, tuck your feet under your butt and push, but kind of lean forward so you don't hit your head. And I'm like, I haven't tucked my feet under my butt in 20 years.
Well, you're not getting out.
He's like, he's looking at me like, I thought for a minute we were going to have a Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree kind of moment there. Like, go get some butter. We got to get this guy out of this tank. But we finally, I was able to get proper leverage.
And that's something about the when I was in, we had transitioned to Bradleys, but we still had the M113s. And I'll tell you what, the difference between the two was the M113 is like sitting in a bus. And if you're in the driver's seat, and I did drive it, it's like those old tanks. It's got the two levers. And it was fun to drive. It was easy to learn. The Bradley, the driver's seat, it had a steering wheel, really complicated. And in the back where you sat, it was so cramped. You're like this, you know. You got metal in your face. I hated being in that thing. I could not get out of it fast enough.
There's a movie about the design of the Bradley and how.
Oh, yeah.
And that should be like foundational movie everybody should watch who wants to write military science fiction, because that's how everything ultimately ends up being, you know, way over designed. I mean, obviously the Bradley ended up being pretty great, but it just like it tried to do everything, and that's why like the 113 was a troop transport, a lightly armored troop transport, you know, and it was tracked, and yeah, it was all terrain. It was great. But the Bradley tried to be a mobile gun. It tried to be infantry support. It tried to be anti-tank. It tried to be, you know,
A scout.
Eventually,
Yeah,
they were able to make it do a lot of those things, but
it did. But it was more luck than anything else.
Well, I
You
mean,
know what's interesting?
you can tell the same story about so many military, like the Black Hawk. They used to call it the Crash Hawk, because
I
they
remember.
crashed a lot. And now they're very reliable, but it took probably a
But the
decade or
Osprey man was a
Oh
death trap.
well, the Osprey's still got problems. Um,
Which
it's
is
gonna
why they're replacing the Blackhawk with a miniature version of the
yeah.
Osprey.
The F-18 had a lot of problems when it first came out. It was didn't trust it over the F-14, but now it's you know
Well, the Super Hornet, yeah, it went through a bunch of different generations.
yeah.
The F-14As had a
Generation was the
compressor.
word I was looking for before. Thank you.
Uh, the F-14A had a compressor stall problem that pilots had to train out of how they flew the plane because they weren't planning on fixing it anytime soon, and they didn't fix it until the B version came out. But like in Top Gun, when he gets on the flat spin, it's because the compressor failed, and you know, and that's what would
It's
happen
all
if you had
covered up.
compressor failure. And the so it's like the first couple of generations of any military vehicle kind of sucks until they
Well,
work plugs out.
you know what though? I use this stuff for research. One of my favorite research sites for mecha stuff is the Australian Armor Museum. They put out a video every week. They're restoring armor. And they'll show you like, okay, we're going to start up this Leopard tank because it's got a leak of some sort. We're going to drive it. And so you watch how they have to start these tanks, and it's almost like a Harry Potter witchcraft thing. Like you hit this button 3 times until this gauge reaches such and such. Then you're going to get a red light. Then you're going to throw this switch over here. Then you wait 8 seconds. Then you have to punch this just to get it started. And I'm like, that stuff is invaluable when you're talking about mecha and stuff, because the Army will find ways to complicate relatively simple technology, and they will complicate complicated technology even more.
It's like starting a Humvee with the switch that you've got to push down and then do the other one. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta push one switch down while you turn the key. And the 5 tons were like that too. You had to activate the glow plugs, and then you had to wait 30 seconds, and then you could do the ignition, and then you had to push a button, and that started it. Like
Hey,
if you just
Blaine,
jumped in to go, you could not just go.
Blaine, if you ever get the chance in Du Bois, Wyoming, there is the National Military Vehicle Museum. You need to take a look at that.
Oh, I will. I will.
There was
I love
a
that stuff.
there was a story out of World War II. It's the only German sub that we captured that we still have. It's in a museum in Illinois, I think.
Yeah, it's a Museum of
Wasn't
Science and
Patrick
Industry,
Swayze involved in that
U-505.
one?
And the
It's been cut up though. What you want to do is go to the USS Cobia up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, because they have left that as it was. They didn't cut any of the bulkheads out. It is as it is.
But if you look at the controls on it, it's just like, how did those guys figure out how to drive that thing? Well, it was towed, but you know what I mean, like keep it afloat. Not only is everything in German, it's like looking at an alien. Nothing makes sense. Like you look at an American sub, you kind of guess like, okay, well, this is where they would sit and this is where they would operate, But they had like buttons and levers and everywhere, like over their heads and at their feet, and it's just like, what were you thinking when you were designing this? Well, we were thinking we were German and we were going to win. That's what we were thinking.
I was on the USS Drum once in Mobile Harbor, just a World War II U.S. submarine. It's right next to the USS Alabama. So you go on the Alabama, it's huge. It's like being in an office building. Then you get in the Drum, it's like, oh my God, get me out of here. I can't even stand to walk in this thing, and these people spent weeks underwater in this.
Oh, just the bar in front of each hatch that you held onto and you kind of kicked back and swung your feet through and then stood up on the other side. It was like, you got to be kidding me. This is insane.
People were a lot thinner back then.
That's true.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's crazy when you think of like stuff that the military uses all the time, and it's not comfortable at all, right? Like the simple thing, like the seats in the Humvees, they're not comfortable. The frames are not comfortable. You rack around in them, especially the up armored ones, and you're hitting your head on the turret and the door frame and all of that. I can't think of like any modern U.S. military equipment, like extrapolating that into mechs. How could they could make that comfortable? Like, how would it be fun to walk around in that thing if they can't even make a Humvee, which is like the most basic vehicle that you could make? You can't make that comfortable, and you're talking about walking around in a 100-ton mech. Like, I would not want that job. I would not want it.
Yeah, they're not going to simplify it. Let's put it that way. And that's one of the things I liked about Titanfall is it had the visual of a complicated cockpit at times.
Right.
And that actually had a lot of appeal to me because I'm like, this would be typical government standard military hardware, which is we have a dial for everything.
Yeah.
And it's laid out in the most idiotic manner possible.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things I did in Tranquility with my rigs is the cockpit of the rig you when you jacked in you had like kind of magnetic contacts that your body interfaced with for like moving and stuff like that. Those would magnetically attach. I think they were on your spine or something. It's been a while. But also the interior, um, the actual saddle was like a a kind of a bio gel that would form around your body. And so it wasn't like a hard seat or like a just a standard size saddle. It would form around the pilot. And so you'd have some at least some level of comfort there while you're inside it moving around and you're not in a seat that's built for someone that's 8 sizes smaller than you are.
So not nylon covered metal plate like they have in the Humvee.
Right, exactly. 100%.
It would be fun to do a mech story if we did it and it was actually done by military designers. It's like, okay, here's the steel bar that you use for a seat.
Right.
Yeah, it's
No one would believe it. They're like, yeah, no one would drive the I guarantee you that's how it would work.
When you get in the mech, there's a bar you have to hold on to sit in. But if the mech's been operating the last hour, that bar is going to be 180 degrees.
Right.
So don't touch the bar.
Don't touch the bar.
Yeah.
And also you'd have the no step here on the ladder. like how do I get in? I can't step on it.
We
Not
should
a
do a short
handhold,
story.
everywhere. Not a handhold.
Not a handhold, right.
Not a handle, not a rest. Yeah. All the tags you'd have to pull off everything to fire a rocket or something,
Oh yeah, true.
just prior to, okay, I'm ready to go. Well, wait, we got to pull all the safety tags and run our checklist.
I would have my wife do a battle mech art, but like put the what are the tags called? Pull this before firing or something.
Yeah.
Just like 100 of them just coming out of everywhere on the mech.
Yeah.
There's like piles of them on the ground as the thing takes off. It's like kicking up piles of these things.
So I did a mech story series with Drew Avery back in the day, and he had a different take on him. I mean, he came up with the idea for the story, and I wrote it, but his take on mechs were didn't use mechs to replace tanks. They weren't like walking battle tanks. He used mechs to replace attack helicopters because he was in a situation where they couldn't maintain or have like bases with LZs for helicopters, and so they came up with these mechs as like they're not heavy, they're mostly just mobile, and but they are able to fly short distances, but they're kind of like mostly their biggest defense is their mobility.
I'm curious, we're talking about like realistic the way the military would do it. Blaine, when it comes to your experience and writing them and in reading them, what do you what can you think of like the most realistic description or way that those mechs have been portrayed in fiction, either yours or somebody else's?
I'd like to think we're close to it. I'm most comfortable with ours because, like I said, we combed DARPA's website for all the advanced armor that they've been looking at, shear thickening fluid and all that other stuff. How would that factor into mechs? And they actually put out a paper, God, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago at this point, about, power armor. And they really came to the conclusion that it's more of a mechanism for carrying heavy gear to the front, like carrying ammo, carrying heavy weapons, things along those lines, or extracting um, wounded, from the combat zone, that, you could have an augmented frame that had light armor covering, but it's mostly to allow them to lift heavy stuff. I always think of Ripley,
I was
the
just
loader.
thinking that.
The
Yeah.
loader in Ripley, to me, was probably the most accurate thing of all, because it was loud and it had a very specific function.
Yeah.
And they even built the crates so that the clamps would come down, and the loader could move them. And honestly, that's been a very big inspiration for me, in a lot of the stuff I've seen it, because I'm like, you throw some armor on there and replace those clamps with some weapons, and that's kind of cool. Um,
Yeah, because when you think about um, either using them for that kind of thing, or the weapons, if you're using them for loading, then yeah, you have to think about the type of container. You wouldn't be able to pick up a cardboard box, right? Because you'd
right.
potentially be crushing the thing. And one of the things that I liked about uh Titanfall, I know we keep going back to that, and
So
BattleTech, but
good.
it's such a good story, but also the mechs are just really well done. One of the things I liked about the Titanfall mechs was that some of their weapons were handheld, like weapons, like they weren't just built
Yeah.
onto the frame. And I really like that idea, um, of making a weapon that the rig could hold. And the, you have the combination of, mounted rocket launchers, but also he could swing a rifle around, and that creates a really good visual, in the game itself, but also in writing something like that. That creates a good visual because you can visualize that happening, and it creates some tension too, right? Because if if you can fire your rocket, it doesn't matter which way you're standing, then okay. But if you've got to actually be pointing your rifle, the rig's got to turn too. And I think that lends itself to a lot of interesting scenarios in terms of just writing.
Yeah. I'd be curious, Rick, what's your best representation you've seen of a mecha?
Uh, well, as far as realism goes, I on yours is pretty close to the most realistic I've seen. Um, as far as just being entertaining, uh, I mean, not that yours isn't entertaining, but I just mean like the the highest one I can remember was William H. Keith had a story called War Striders.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoyed that. I mean, it was a little bit realistic. It was far future, so he hand waved a lot of that stuff, but I found it very entertaining. William H. Keith is the pen name for, is it Ian Douglas is his real name, I think, something like that.
Bill Keith. No, I think Bill Keith uses a lot of different other pen names.
Oh, okay. I thought I couldn't remember which one was the pen name and which one was the
Hey, my favorite is probably got to be Robotech, because the Veritechs were just. I mean, I grew up watching that, and the Veritechs were just. They spoke to my soul. Not only do they look like Tomcats, which are the greatest fighter ever made, but they turned into battle suits, and they had the other functions, and they flew in space. I've actually reached out to Harmony Gold on a number of occasions. So if by some chance that they see this, I would love to write Robotech. Just saying, I would love to write Robotech. They're
I
not
think
doing anything with it now, though.
but I was to get back to what you said, Blaine. Yeah, Ian Douglas is the pen name he wrote it under. I couldn't remember which was which. Yeah,
All those names.
yeah. How
All
about
right,
you?
so we're at about an hour here, Blaine. Tell us where we can find you at, and what you're working on next, and what we can expect from you over the next year. Are you going to be at any cons?
I'm going to Based Con, and that's about it for the year. I'm trying to cut back on going to the cons until we get our miniatures game out, which we're working on right now. So once that's out, I'm going to be doing game cons, Adepticon and probably Gen Con. But the next book I got coming out should be Tenure 3. I'm doing those with Mike Barron, who was one of the original guys who wrote the comic book for the Punisher. It's third book in the Tenure series. The sixth book of the Blue Dawn series is with the editor right now. And I just finished a book. We're starting a little trilogy within the Land and Sea universe. It's about a Marine unit. If you've ever seen the movie The Dirty Dozen, I decided to do The Dirty Dozen with Mecha, and it's against aliens, and it's a blast.
Nice.
Nothing beats Chesty Puller's great line of "Take me to the brig. I want to see the real Marines," and that's the opening to the book.
Love it.
Well, awesome. Well, for the rest of us, Rick is working on Archangel. I've got a new series I'm working on, and also Grim 9. And Josh, you're still working on Weaponized, I hope, right?
It's close. It's close. It's close. I'm probably going to be looking for advanced readers here in the next probably
Year or two.
month or two. No, it's closer than that. I've made
Season
really
6.
good progress on it.
Weaponized is coming in season
It's
6.
season 6.
Yeah, there you go.
100%.
Also, don't forget, Rick and I are both going to be at Barnes & Noble nationwide, September 23rd. Very excited about that.
That's
So,
September 23rd. Holy crap!
September 23rd.
If you're going to Dragon Con, I'll be there in August, at the end of August.
The only con I think I'm going out for this year and probably next year is Writers Cantina. I need to write more and chill less.
Indeed.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so other people can see the awesomeness that is Blaine Pardoe. And thank you guys all for joining us. And we'll see you next week.